Her parents left her a $10 workshop in the middle of nowhere. What she discovered inside was worth more than the town it was in. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, with nothing but a key to a door you've never seen, then stick around. This story is for you. And if you believe that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all, hit that subscribe button because you're in the right place. The day I turned 18, the world gave me two things: a cardboard box and a signature line. The box held 17 years of my life, condensed into a few worn paperbacks, a faded stuffed bear with one button eye, and a stack of school photos where my smile never quite reached my eyes. The signature line was on a form that officially released me from the custody of the state of California. It was a sterile legal severing. One moment, I was a ward. The next, I was just on my own. Miss Albright, my caseworker for the last 4 years, sat across from me in the visitor's room of the group home. It was the same beige room where I'd had every other serious conversation of my life. The air smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. She had a kind face, etched with the faint lines of 1,000 other kids' worries, but today her expression was carefully neutral. "So that's it, Alara," she said, folding her hands on the table. "You're an adult." The word felt like a costume that didn't fit. I looked down at my hands, at the chipped nail polish on my short fingernails. They didn't look like the hands of an adult. They looked like the hands of a girl who was good at being invisible. "I've arranged for your placement at the transitional housing unit downtown. You have 6 months," she continued, her voice practical, a well-worn script. "There's a job placement program. You'll be fine. You're resourceful." Resourceful. That's what they called you when you learned not to ask for anything. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The cardboard box sat on the chair beside me, a pathetic monument to my entire existence. I expected her to stand up, shake my hand, and walk out, leaving me to navigate the rest of my life from a bus schedule and a list of resources. But she didn't. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a large, stiff manila envelope. It looked old, the corners softened with age, the paper yellowed to the color of weak tea. "There's one more thing," she said, her professional calm wavering for just a second. "Your parents, they left something for you. In a trust. It became legally yours this morning, on your 18th birthday." The air in the room went still. My parents. The two people who existed for me only as a faded photograph and a vague, painful story of a car accident when I was a baby. I was told they had nothing. No family, no money, no home. That's why I'd ended up here. My throat was tight. "They left me something?" "Yes." She pushed the envelope across the table. My name, Alara Vance, was written on the front in a looping, unfamiliar script. It wasn't her handwriting. It's not much, monetarily speaking. I don't want you to get your hopes up." I picked it up. It was heavy. Not just with paper, but with the weight of a life I'd never known. My fingers trembled as I opened the metal clasp. Inside, there wasn't a check or a savings bond. There was a single tarnished brass key on a plain metal ring, and a thick, folded document. It was a deed. I unfolded it carefully, the old paper threatening to tear along the creases. The legal language was dense, but I could make out the important parts. It was a deed for a property. Lot 7, Block 4, in a town I'd never heard of. Silver Creek, California. The property was described as a workshop and surrounding parcel. At the bottom, in a section for assessed value for tax purposes, a clerk had typed a number: $10. My parents had left me a $10 workshop in the middle of nowhere. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't even a joke. It was just sad. All those years, I'd secretly imagined them as tragic, romantic figures. Poor, maybe, but full of love. This felt different. This felt like an afterthought, a piece of junk they couldn't be bothered to throw away. "Alara," Ms. Albright said gently, seeing the look on my face. "There's more." A letter came with it, from a law firm representing a developer. She handed me a second, newer envelope. This one was crisp, white, and impersonal. I opened it. It was from a company called Northwood Ventures. They were direct. They understood they were writing to the new owner of the property at Lot 7. They noted its dilapidated state, its tax delinquent history, which the trust had apparently cleared just before my birthday, and its general lack of value. They were prepared, as a gesture of goodwill to help me with my newfound and likely burdensome responsibility, to offer me $5,000 to take it off my hands. $5,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 million. It was more money than I had ever seen. It was a security deposit on a real apartment. It was a used car. It was a future free from transitional housing and job placement programs. It was a ticket out. "The offer is valid for 30 days, Ms. Albright said, her voice soft. "It's your decision, of course." It seems like the sensible thing to do. I looked from the crisp corporate letter to the old yellowed deed, from the promise of $5,000 to the tarnished brass key. Sensible. Yes, it was sensible to take the money. It was practical. It was resourceful. But as I sat there in that beige room, with the smell of lemon cleaner in my nose and the weight of my entire life in a cardboard box next to me, a different feeling began to stir. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper. It was curiosity. Why hold on to a $10 piece of junk for 17 years? Why put it in a trust? Why leave a key? "Where is this place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Silver Creek?" Ms. Albright sighed, a small puff of resignation. "It's up north, Sierra Nevada foothills, a long way from here. There's not much there anymore. It's a dying town, from what I understand. A dying town, a $10 workshop, a key, and a choice. The sensible path was clear. Sign the papers, take the money, and never look back. Start my adult life with a small cushion, a clean slate. Forget the ghosts of the parents who had left me with nothing but a worthless building." But as I closed my fingers around that cold brass key, I knew I couldn't. It was the only thing they had ever given me, and I had to know why. The transitional housing unit was a single room with a kitchenette, a mattress on a metal frame, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was clean, safe, and suffocatingly anonymous. For the first week, I followed the rules. I went to the job placement seminar. I filled out applications for jobs at coffee shops and grocery stores. I ate instant noodles and watched the shadows move across the brick wall. The $5,000 offer from Northwood Ventures sat on the small table, a constant, nagging temptation. Every time I looked at it, I felt the sensible part of my brain screaming at me to just sign the damn thing. But my hand always went back to the key. I kept it in my pocket, and my fingers would trace its jagged edges, the smooth, worn metal. It was a question mark cast in brass. On the 8th day, I made a decision. I took the cash I'd been given as a graduation stipend, a few $100s meant to last me until my first paycheck, and I bought a one-way bus ticket to a town called Oak Haven, the closest stop to Silver Creek. The bus ride was a journey through worlds. It started in the sprawling, sun-bleached concrete of Los Angeles, a city that had always felt alien to me, a place I had existed in but never belonged to. For hours, we moved through a landscape of strip malls and freeways, the air thick with heat and exhaust. I watched the faces of the people who got on and off. Tired faces, hopeful faces, faces that were just trying to get to the next stop. I felt like one of them, a ghost in transit. Then, slowly, the landscape began to change. The flatlands gave way to rolling hills, green at first, then turning a parched gold under the relentless summer sun. The endless sprawl of suburbs thinned out, replaced by farmland and orchards. The bus climbed, the engine groaning in protest, winding its way up into the mountains. The air grew thinner, cooler. Pine trees started to appear, first as lonely sentinels, then in thick, dark forests that crowded the roadside. I had never been in the mountains before. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The sky seemed bigger, a deeper, more impossible blue. The silence between the small towns was a living thing. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the world unspool. This was their world, my parents'. For the first time, I felt a flicker of connection, not to a memory, but to a place. They had driven these roads. They had breathed this air. The bus finally pulled into Oakhaven, a town that looked like it was clinging to the side of a mountain by its fingernails. It was a single main street with a gas station, a diner, and a few dusty storefronts. From there, the bus driver told me, Silver Creek was another 10 miles up a county road. There was no bus. You can try to call a cab, he said, shrugging as he unloaded my single bag and the cardboard box. If they feel like coming up here. The air smelled of pine needles and dust. A lone hawk circled high overhead. I was completely, utterly alone. I sat on a bench outside the closed-down general store, the cardboard box at my feet, and felt a wave of panic wash over me. What was I doing here? I had chased a ghost, a feeling, a $10 piece of junk, and now I was stranded. The offer from Northwood Ventures felt like a lifeline I had foolishly cut. Just as I was about to give in to despair, a rusty pickup truck sputtered to a stop in front of me. An old man with a face like a road map and a sweat-stained baseball cap leaned out the window. "You look lost," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm trying to get to Silver Creek," I mumbled. He squinted at me. "Ain't much left in Silver Creek. You got family there?" "Something like that," I said. "They left me a property, a workshop." His eyebrows shot up. "The old Vance place? On the edge of town? Lord, that thing's still standing?" Vance. He knew their name. A jolt went through me. "You knew them?" "Knew of 'em," he corrected, chewing on a toothpick. "They were different. Kept to themselves. Smart, though. Real smart. He was always tinkering with something. She was a botanist, I think. Always out in the woods. Then one day, they were just gone. Tragic, what happened." He shook his head slowly. "Well, get in. I'm headed that way. Name's Gus." The ride in Gus's truck was bumpy and loud. He pointed out landmarks that meant nothing to me. The old mine, the place where the schoolhouse used to be. He talked about how the town had dried up after the lumber mill closed down. "People left for the city. Nothing here for the young folks anymore," he said, a note of sadness in his voice. "Just us old-timers and the trees." Finally, he slowed the truck and pointed. "There she is, Silver Creek." It wasn't so much a town as a collection of a dozen weathered buildings huddled along a curve in the road. A few houses had lights on, but most looked empty, their windows like vacant eyes. And at the far end, set back from the road and half swallowed by overgrown manzanita bushes and towering pines, was a single, dilapidated structure, the workshop. It was worse than I had imagined. The wood siding was bleached gray and peeling, warped by decades of sun and snow. The roof sagged in the middle, looking like it might collapse under its own weight. Half the windows were boarded up, the other half shattered. A tall, dead oak tree loomed over it, its bare branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the crumbling roof. It didn't look like it was worth $10. It looked like it was worth less than nothing. Gus pulled over. "This is it. You sure you want to be here?" "I'm sure," I said, though my heart was sinking. He helped me unload my box and bag. "Diner's open till 7. Mabel will fix you something to eat. You need anything, you ask for Gus." He gave me a long, searching look, then tipped his cap and drove off, leaving me in a cloud of dust and silence. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. The home of the ghosts, my inheritance. It was a ruin, a monument to failure and forgotten dreams. The developer's offer wasn't an insult. It was charity. Slowly, I walked up the overgrown path. Weeds cracked under my feet. The front door was a solid slab of wood, weathered and scarred, with a heavy, rusted iron lock. I took a deep breath and pulled the brass key from my pocket. It felt small and inadequate against the heavy lock. I slid it in. The metal scraped. For a second, I was sure it wouldn't turn. It was all a mistake. The wrong key, the wrong place, the wrong life. Then, with a groan of protest, the lock clicked. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on creaking hinges, disturbing a decade of dust. A single beam of late afternoon sun cut through the grime of a high window, illuminating a blizzard of dancing dust motes. The air that rushed out was thick and heavy, the smell of old wood, cold metal, turpentine, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. I stepped inside. The interior of the workshop was one vast cavernous room. The ceiling soared high overhead, crisscrossed with heavy wooden beams. The place was a chaotic museum of forgotten work. Long, sturdy workbenches lined the walls, cluttered with tools I couldn't name, strange metal contraptions, and half-finished projects shrouded in dusty canvas. Blueprints and schematics, curled and yellowed, were pinned to the walls, covered in dense, elegant handwriting and complex mathematical equations. It wasn't the workshop of a simple handyman. It was the laboratory of a mad scientist, or a genius. The sheer volume of stuff was overwhelming. It was a mess, but it was a purposeful mess. Every object seemed to have a story, a reason for being where it was. I ran my hand over the surface of a workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the thick layer of dust. Underneath, the wood was scarred with burns, cuts, and oil stains. This was a place where things had been made, things had been created. I spent the next hour just walking through the space, touching things, trying to feel some connection. I found a shelf of books on electrical engineering, physics, and metallurgy. I found a box of carefully categorized and labeled rocks and minerals. I found a small withered plant in a pot, long dead, with a Latin name on a plastic tag. This was them. This was the first real evidence of who my parents were. They weren't just a tragic story. They were people who read these books, who used these tools, who tried to grow this plant. In the center of the workshop, a large object was covered by a heavy gray tarp. It was the size of a small car. Whatever it was the focus of the room. All the workbenches seemed to be oriented towards it. Wires and cables snaked from it across the floor. I reached out to pull back the tarp, but my hand stopped. I wasn't ready, not yet. My eyes scanned the room again, and this time they caught something. Tucked away under the deepest, most cluttered workbench in the back corner, almost completely hidden by shadows and junk, was a dark green, military-style metal footlocker. It was a stark, functional object in a room full of chaotic creation. It had a heavy-duty latch, secured with a small, brass padlock. My heart started to beat faster. It felt important. I dropped to my knees and tried to pull it out, but it was heavy. I grunted with effort, my sneakers slipping on the dusty concrete floor, and finally managed to drag it into the light. The padlock looked old, but strong. My beautiful brass key didn't fit. Disappointment washed over me. Of course, another dead end. I sat back on my heels, tired, dusty, and emotionally drained. The sun was setting, and the workshop was growing cold. The sensible thing to do was to go to the diner, get a hot meal, and find a place to sleep. Then, in the morning, I would call the number on the developer's letter and take the $5,000. I would leave this place and all its ghosts behind. I stood up, ready to go. As I turned, my foot kicked something small and metallic on the floor. It skittered under the workbench. Annoyed, I got back down on my hands and knees to find it. My fingers brushed against something cold. I pulled it out. It was a small, delicate silver key, the kind you might use for a diary or a jewelry box. It was attached to a thin, broken leather cord, as if it had once been worn around someone's neck. I looked at the key, then at the padlock on the footlocker. It was a long shot. The key was tiny, the lock was thick, but when I slid it into the keyhole, it fit perfectly. With a soft click, the padlock sprang open. My hands were shaking as I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. I didn't know what I expected to find. Money? Valuables? Something that would explain the $5,000 offer. The inside of the box was lined with felt, and it smelled faintly of paper and ink. There was no treasure. There was only a single, thick stack of letters, tied together with a simple piece of twine. On top of the stack was a photograph. It was a picture of a man and a woman. The man had dark, unruly hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He was holding a baby. The woman was beautiful, with long, dark hair and a brilliant smile. She was looking at the baby with an expression of such pure, fierce love that it took my breath away. The baby was me. This was the first picture I had ever seen of them where they looked happy, where we looked like a family. My vision blurred with tears. I picked up the stack of letters. The top one was addressed to Our Star, Elara. The handwriting was the same elegant script from the manila envelope. I untied the twine and unfolded the first page. It was dated a week after my first birthday. "My dearest Elara," it began, "if you are reading this, then we are gone, and you are old enough to understand. There is so much I need to tell you, and I am so sorry that I have to do it in a letter. I would give anything in this world to be telling you this in person, to see your face as you hear it. Please know, whatever else you have been told, that we loved you more than life itself. Your mother and I, we never, ever wanted to leave you." I had to stop reading. A sob, raw and ragged, tore its way out of my chest. I cried for the baby in the picture. I cried for the little girl who grew up in a dozen different foster homes, believing she was an orphan, an accident, an inconvenience. I cried for the 18-year-old girl sitting on a dusty floor in a ruined workshop, holding the truth in her hands. After a long time, my tears subsided, and I continued to read. The letter was from my father, Thomas Vance. He explained everything. He and my mother, Lena, weren't just tinkerers, they were scientists. He was an engineer, and she was a brilliant physicist and botanist. They had met at university, two restless minds who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. They had left the world of corporate and academic research, disillusioned with the bureaucracy and the focus on profit over progress. They had bought this workshop in this forgotten town to be free, to build something that could change the world. And they had. He wrote about their work. They had discovered a way to generate clean, cheap, and incredibly efficient energy using principles of bioluminescence and resonant frequencies. It sounds complicated, and it was, but the way he described it, it was pure magic. He called it the Stellaron Project. He wrote about how my mother had found a rare species of deep earth lichen that produced a faint light, and how he had figured out how to amplify its energy output 1,000,000-fold. Their prototype could power a small town for a year on a handful of the stuff. It was the answer to the energy crisis. It was a gift to the world. But gifts like that are dangerous. As their research progressed, they had attracted unwanted attention. A major energy corporation, a subsidiary of a company called Northwood, had tried to buy their patents. My parents had refused. They believed the technology should belong to everyone, not be controlled by a corporation that would bury it or sell it to the highest bidder. Northwood hadn't taken no for an answer. The friendly offers had turned into threats. They were followed. Their workshop was broken into. They knew they were in danger. And they knew that the most vulnerable part of their lives was me. "We had a choice, Elara," he wrote, his handwriting growing shakier. "We could stop our work and run, but they would never have stopped hunting us. Or we could protect you and finish what we started. We chose you. We had to make it look like we were unfit, neglectful parents. We created a paper trail of debt and instability. We staged an abandonment. It was the hardest thing we have ever done, leaving you that day. Your mother cried for a week. I think a part of her died. But we knew you would be safe in the system, anonymous, invisible. No one would ever connect you to us or our work." They had planned to finish the prototype, release the research to the public domain, and then come back for me. They had set up the trust, with the deed to the workshop as the only thing in it, a breadcrumb trail that only I could follow once I was an adult, free from the state's watch. But they never got the chance. The last paragraph of the letter was almost illegible. "Something is wrong. They are closing in. We have to hide the prototype. If we don't make it, the key is in the light. Always look for the light, Ilara. Don't let them win. Finish what we started. We love you. We will always love you. The letter was dated 2 days before the car accident. The accident that the state had told me was caused by a drunk driver. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. I sat there in the deepening gloom, the letter shaking in my hand. The world had tilted on its axis. My entire life, the story I had been told, was a lie. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. My parents weren't tragic figures who had died in a random accident. They were heroes who had been murdered for trying to save the world. And Northwood Ventures, the friendly developer offering me $5,000 to take this burdensome property off my hands. They weren't a developer. They were the monster that had killed my parents. They weren't trying to buy the land. They were trying to bury the secret that was hidden here. I looked around the workshop, no longer seeing a ruin. I saw a sanctuary, a fortress, a legacy. I looked at the large, tarp-covered object in the center of the room, the prototype. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. It was a storm of emotions too vast to name. I was drowning in 17 years of lies, of pain, of loneliness. I laid my head down on the cold metal of the footlocker, and I wept. I wept for the parents I had never known but now loved with a fierce, aching intensity. I wept for the life we could have had. I wept for their sacrifice. The offer from Northwood was still in my pocket, $5,000. All I had to do was sign. I could walk away from this. I could take the money and disappear. It was the safe option, the sensible option. No one would blame me. I was just a kid. How could I possibly fight a massive corporation? How could I finish the work of 2 brilliant scientists? It was impossible. I could take the money and live a normal life. That's what they would have wanted, right? For me to be safe? But as I read more of the letters, dozens of them, written over a year, full of their love for me, their hopes for the future, their passion for their work, I realized that wasn't true. They didn't sacrifice everything just for me to be safe. They sacrificed everything for me to be free, and to give me a choice, the choice to run or the choice to fight. If you've made it this far, maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A moment where you discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your family or your past. A moment where you were faced with a choice that felt too big to possibly make. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us carry these hidden stories. Let me know in the comments if this is hitting home for you, because this community is about sharing those burdens and finding strength in them. Now, let's get back to what happened in that workshop. The sun had set completely, and the workshop was pitch black, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. The cold had settled deep into my bones, but I didn't move. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the paper ghosts of my parents, and I thought. For my entire life, I had been defined by what I didn't have. No parents, no home, no history. I was a blank slate, a ward of the state, a case file number. My future was a narrow path laid out for me. Transitional housing, a low-wage job, a life of just getting by. I had accepted it. It was my story. But it wasn't my story. It was a cover story. My real story was here, in this dusty, forgotten building. My history was in the letters in my lap. My legacy was under a tarp in the middle of the room. My parents had given me something more valuable than money. They had given me a purpose. They had given me a truth to fight for. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. Northwood was a giant. I was nobody. They had killed my parents. What could I possibly do? But then I felt something else begin to grow alongside the fear. It was a slow, burning anger. An anger for the life that was stolen from me, and for the future that was stolen from the world. And underneath the anger, something even more powerful: love. A deep, resonant love for the 2 people who had made the ultimate sacrifice for me. They had trusted me. Their last words to me were, "Finish what we started." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, painting pale gray stripes across the dusty floor, I made my choice. I would not sell. I would not run. I would stay. I folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the footlocker, along with the photograph. I closed the lid and snapped the little silver padlock shut. It felt like closing a chapter and opening a new one. I stood up, my body stiff from the cold floor. I walked to the center of the room and stood before the tarp-covered machine. My hands trembled as I took hold of the rough canvas. I took a deep breath, and I pulled. The tarp was heavy, stiff with age. It came away with a whoosh of displaced air, revealing what was beneath. It wasn't a single machine. It was an intricate, beautiful assembly of copper coils, crystalline structures, and glowing glass spheres, all interconnected by a web of wires and conduits. It looked like something born from the mind of both an artist and an engineer. In the center was a sealed, lead-lined chamber. Even in the dim light, I could see a faint, pulsating green glow emanating from within it. The lichen, the source of the power. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. My father's last letter echoed in my mind. The key is in the light. It wasn't a metaphor. He was talking about the prototype. This was the key to everything. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know the first thing about physics or engineering. But I knew one thing: I had to protect it. My first act as the guardian of my parents' legacy was small and practical. I found a broom. The handle was smooth and worn from my father's hands. And I started to sweep. I swept a small circle of clarity in the chaos of the workshop floor. It was a tiny act of defiance, an act of claiming my space, an act of beginning. With each stroke of the broom, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain. This wasn't just their workshop anymore. It was my home. The first call I made was to Ms. Albright. I used the payphone outside the diner, feeding it a handful of quarters. Her voice was full of concern when she heard it was me. "Ilara, where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm in Silver Creek," I said, my voice steady. "I'm at the workshop, and I'm not selling." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ilara, we need to talk about this. That $5,000 could set you up for—" "It's not about the money," I interrupted, more forcefully than I intended. "They're not developers, Ms. Albright. They're the people who killed my parents." I told her everything. About the letters, the prototype, the threats. I expected her to think I was crazy, that I was a grieving, imaginative kid making up stories. But she just listened. When I was done, the line was silent for a full minute. "Okay," she finally said, her voice low and serious. "Don't talk to anyone else. Don't sign anything. Don't even answer the door if someone comes knocking. I'm going to make a call. I know someone, a lawyer. He handles unusual cases. He owes me a favor. Just stay put and stay safe. I'll call you back at this number in 2 hours." For the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel completely alone. While I waited, I went into the diner. It was a small, clean place that smelled of coffee and bacon. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, who I assumed was Mabel, took my order. The few other patrons, old men in flannel shirts, looked me over with frank curiosity. News traveled fast in a town this small. I was Gus's lost girl, the one who'd come to claim the old Vance place. I ate a stack of pancakes that tasted like the best thing I'd ever eaten. I was starving. As I paid, Mabel slid a piece of pie onto the counter. "On the house," she said. "Welcome to Silver Creek. It's good to see some life in that old place again." Her simple kindness was a balm on my raw nerves. I walked back to the workshop feeling a little less like an intruder and a little more like I might actually belong here. 2 hours later, the payphone rang. It was Ms. Albright. "His name is Benjamin Davies," she said, her voice all business. "He's a pro bono lawyer who specializes in corporate malfeasance. He's good, Ilara, and he's interested. He wants to see copies of the letters and any research you can find. Do not mail them. He's arranging for a secure courier. And he said, under no circumstances are you to engage with Northwood Ventures. Forward any communication directly to him." A lawyer, a plan. It was starting to feel real. The next few days were a blur of activity. I bought cleaning supplies, work gloves, and a camp stove from the hardware store in Oak Haven. The man at the counter, a gruff but helpful guy named Sal, remembered my father. "Quiet fella," he'd said. "Always buying strange parts. Copper wire, weird gaskets. Paid cash." I figured he was a moonshiner. I cleaned the workshop with a feverish intensity. It was my way of connecting with my parents, of honoring them. As I cleared away the layers of dust and grime, the space began to reveal more of their personality. I found my mother's gardening gloves, caked with dirt, lying next to a complex wiring diagram. I found a coffee mug with a cartoon atom on it that said, "I'm positively charged." I imagined my father sipping from it in the early morning light, wrestling with an equation. I found a faded photograph tucked inside a book, a picture of them on a hike, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. They were so young, so full of life. Each discovery was a bittersweet gift, a puzzle piece of the family I never had. A week later, a formal, threatening letter arrived from Northwood's legal department. It was delivered by a courier who looked distinctly uncomfortable to be there. The letter spoke of eminent domain, of public nuisance laws. It said if I did not accept their generous final offer of $7,000, they would begin legal proceedings to have the property condemned and seized. The friendly mask was off. This was a threat. I scanned it, my hands shaking, and sent it straight to Mr. Davies. His call came the next day. "This is good," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "They're overplaying their hand. They're trying to scare you. It means they're worried. It means they know you have something." He instructed me to start documenting everything. "Photograph every page of your father's research, every letter, every schematic on the walls. We need to build a case. We need to prove what they did." So I began a new, more important task. I wasn't just cleaning anymore. I was excavating. I was an archaeologist of my own past. I carefully took down the blueprints from the walls, finding more notes, more equations scribbled in the margins. I opened dusty binders and found my mother's research on the lichen, complete with hand-drawn botanical illustrations and data on its energy-producing properties. It was slow, painstaking work. Most of the science was far beyond my comprehension. But I began to see the story it told, the story of two brilliant minds working together, on the verge of a breakthrough that could have changed the course of human history. As I worked, I thought about the concept of inheritance. I had grown up believing I had inherited nothing, an empty box. But I was wrong. I had inherited a mission. I had inherited a legacy of courage and conviction. And I had inherited a choice, to live a small, safe life, or to stand for something big, something that mattered, even if it was dangerous. The workshop was no longer a dilapidated building. It was a testament to my parents' love and genius. The sagging roof and broken windows didn't matter. The foundation was strong. The work that had happened within these walls was more valuable than any mansion, any stock portfolio, any pile of money. This place wasn't worth $10 or $5,000 or even $7,000. It was priceless because it held the truth, it held the future, and it held the key to who I was meant to be. The days bled into weeks. My life found a new rhythm, dictated by the rising sun and the slow, methodical work of uncovering my parents' world. I fell asleep on a cot in the corner, exhausted, and woke up with the scent of old wood and new purpose in my lungs. I was building something, not with tools and schematics, but with understanding and resolve. I was building a bridge back to them. One afternoon, while carefully cleaning a shelf of my mother's botany journals, I found something tucked between the pages of a book on native Sierra flora. It was a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't a scientific note. It was a poem, written in my mother's delicate handwriting. It was about a star that falls to earth, not to burn out, but to hide its light within a seed, waiting for the right hands to plant it, so it could grow into a forest of light for the whole world to see. At the bottom, she had written, "For Ilara, our little star." I finally understood. They hadn't just been building a machine, they were planting a seed, and they had trusted me to be the one to tend to it. The legal battle was just beginning. The fight against Northwood would be long and difficult. The science was still a mountain I had to learn how to climb. The future was a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating unknown. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly grounded. I knew who I was. I was Alara Vance. I was the daughter of Thomas and Lena Vance, and this was my home. I looked around the workshop, at the half-cleaned workbenches, the stacks of documented research, the majestic, silent prototype waiting in the center of it all. It was a mess. It was a challenge. It was a promise. And it was mine. This whole journey started because my parents left me something that the world told me was worthless, a $10 workshop. But they knew its real value. Sometimes, the things that look like burdens are actually gifts. The things that look like endings are actually beginnings. What about you? Has anyone ever handed you something that seemed small or broken, only for you to discover the treasure hidden inside? It doesn't have to be a workshop full of secrets. It could be a piece of advice, a second chance, or a story from a grandparent that changes how you see everything. The world is full of these hidden inheritances, if we just have the courage to look past the dust and the broken windows. Thank you for being here, for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is a place for people who know what it's like to fight for the truth, to find family in unexpected places, and to build a future out of the pieces of the past. Share your own story in the comments below. I read every single one, because every story matters, and every one of us deserves to find our own forest of light.